So we're going to look at the poem The City Planners by Margaret Atwood. This is quite an unusual poem for Atwood because she's primarily a sci-fi writer who specializes, I would say, in novels, but she does actually have some really amazing poetry as well. So yeah, if you like sci-fi, check out her novels. Specifically, the ones that I really like are The Handmaid's Tale, which is probably her most famous, and a more historical one called Alias Grace that has some really beautiful descriptions and that kind of thing in. And yeah, she's surprisingly good at poetry as well because she's not really known so much for her poetry. But yeah, strangely, she's good at both. Usually, it's hard for writers to be good at writing novels and also poems. So yeah, we're going to jump into this one. So a city planner, in case you're wondering what that is, it's someone who plans a city. They basically sit down and draw up kind of a map of the town, and they figure out which buildings are we going to knock down, where are we going to build roads, what kinds of things are we going to keep, or if they're building a city from scratch, how do they sort the whole thing out. So a city planner is someone who makes the decisions for how a city is being built. So yeah, we'll have a look a little bit at the poem first. It's in copyright, so I can't put it here. So I want you to just get a copy of the poem and read it aloud to yourself. You might want to have a look at this vocabulary first as well, just to give you a bit of support with the vocab. It's quite high level vocab in this one, so just make sure you know what those words mean before you start reading. So yeah, pause me, read the poem aloud, underline anything that you think stands out that seems important, and then we'll jump into the story once you're done. So the story, she's driving through, or the speaker's driving through the streets on a Sunday and kind of offended by how neat and boring everything is. So the houses are all kind of in rows and the trees are all planted regularly. And yeah, it's almost too perfect. You can't do anything. The lawnmower sound screams through the neighborhood. And there's perfect driveways, slanted roofs. It's a suburban world that is perfect, but not everything is as it seems. There's imperfection too, spilled oil, sickness hanging in the garages, mistaken paint splashed onto brick, a water pipe coiled in the stair of the fixed windows, where the cracks in the plaster hide behind the windows when the houses will not be able to stand the test of time, even though no one thinks this now. There's a tension between order and chaos, between regularity and instability, between the order that humans impose upon the world when we're planning things efficiently and we're just trying to maximize convenience and profit. We'll just kind of replicate things and make them very ordered and regular, which is why if you go into a suburban area of a city, a suburb is like on the kind of parts of the city which are mostly the outskirts or like specific pockets that you call the suburbs. And they're just rows and rows of usually middle class houses, quite big houses, big gardens, but they all look the same. They don't have any character. I sort of grew up in the suburbs and I found it a really uninspiring place to be. It was not fun. And now I make sure that I live in weirder, older houses that are full of character and they're quite unique. But yeah, I mean, most people actually live, in uniform, regular type of housing, like either flats or, suburbs or that kind of thing. And it's completely normal for them. But yeah, Atwood, and I would agree with her here. She has this feeling there's something a bit sickening and unnatural and wrong about just replicating buildings over and over again because it's convenient. So she's interested in the idea that nature pushes back against this regularity. Nature is not regular, it's chaotic and it's kind of random. So even in this kind of regular suburban setting, there's, spilled oil, sickness, paint, water pipe. There's images of decay, chaos. There's sort of like imposition, small little impositions on the regularity of those suburbs. And then when she skips forward thinking in time, she realizes actually that's, over time that's going to get more and more chaotic, and the regularity of these houses are going to break down. So they won't stand the test of time. They won't beat nature. Eventually, all of the, regular suburbs that seem strong and well built are going to crumble back into dust, or they'll get demolished. So the city planners, the people who are responsible for making the city look like this, they conspire like political leaders scattered over the disordered places and hiding from one another in their own private mess. They don't know where they're going, so they don't understand long term what they're trying to do for the city or for the people. They just draw a few lines with a fixed intention on a wall that is not likely to exist in the future, creating another suburb that will just vanish. So it's about the lack of care and foresight and depth and intention that goes into modern urbanization. Urbanization is where you turn countryside into city. She's basically saying that it's kind of not only boring, but kind of unnatural and dehumanizing to just keep making really regular rows of houses and regular rows of buildings that all look the same and making people live in them. And the politics behind this is just sort of short-term capitalistic gain. It's not really for any long-term benefit, and it's not really for the welfare of the people in mind either, because it's not so satisfying for individuals living in them to exist in that way. I have a little pop-up for some reason on my screen. I don't know how to get rid of those things. I don't even like news pop-ups, so I always tell it to not do that, and then it does. I don't know why. Anyway. So yeah, the aesthetic of the neighborhood, how it looks, is repetitive. There's no individuality. It seems like things are perfect on the surface, but there's these problems underneath that are kind of going to eventually signify the ruin of this place. And it points blame specifically at city planners. And it's got a kind of despondent tone. So she feels like, this is just going to keep happening over and over again because it's the most cheap, effective, convenient way to plan a city. It's not the best way, it's not the most beautiful, it's not the most interesting, but it's just practical. And and it kind of ruins the vibe of a city, or the life of a city. So old houses, I really like Victorian houses. I used to own a Victorian house. The one that I have now is from 1930, but it was hand built by the great grandfather of the lady I bought it from, which is really cool. And then her family lived in it the whole time. And before that, I lived in a flat that was part of a really old farmhouse from the 1500s, and it was like a barn that had been turned into a house. That was quite a mad one. So yeah, I've lived in like very weird places over my life. I really like designing houses and doing them up, and I like the unique character of individual spaces. So you might want to jot down about whether you care about this topic or not. I think it affects some people more than others, the idea of regular architecture or regular planning. Do you not mind living in a regular uniform space, or have you ever lived in a weird, unusual place before? You might just kind of sit and jot down a few of your own thoughts on this topic, whether you agree with Atwood or not, because not everyone is going to have this response. So yeah, we've got a lot of language techniques here. You can look through them more if you download this document from the Scribbly page. But yeah, there's a lot of techniques and a lot of repetition of the same feature. So you can see here lots of personification, lots of types of imagery, lots of types of metaphor. So she's sort of packing the poem full of really like vivid techniques that she's sort of using again and again. There's a sense of 7 stanzas but uneven line length. We would call that a free verse structure. it shows irregularity, and it's kind of reflecting the theme of regular versus irregular, or order versus chaos. So she's deliberately chosen to make it into an irregular structure because she's kind of on the side of nature. She prefers the more rough, irregular chaos that is natural to the human kind of like regularity, like the repetitiveness of humans. There's also a shortening of stanzas, which suggests the idea of decline, that things are kind of degrading, getting worse over time. Yeah, and one of the key messages is that city planning kind of threatens nature and our survival, you could say, or maybe just is a sort of counter to nature. It's unnatural, and it makes humans feel disconnected with nature and the real world because we're just living in these little boxes that are all not really feeling like, personal, unique, or individual as nature would feel. There's also no regular rhyme scheme, but there are a few words that rhyme, so it's good to kind of go back into the poem and just kind of highlight which words rhyme or half rhyme. Think about why do they connect together in meaning. So if a poet randomly rhymes words together, it means that they're deliberately wanting you to compare or contrast those two words, or find some common ground between them. So you can kind of go through and think about why she rhymes certain words together. There's a lot of enjambement, so it's very kind of fluid, and it runs on. Again, that's more natural than having regular stanzas that are all end stopped. So you can think about that too. So a couple of pieces of context. It's 1965, so poor Atwood published this a while ago, and I think it's the situation of the world is a lot worse now, probably because of overpopulation or population increase. There's more and more demand for housing, especially if you live somewhere like the UK where there's not much land. And so it just makes space for people to very quickly build things that are kind of, livable, but not beautiful, not well made, kind of makeshift sort of places. There's this really crazy thing that councils are doing now where, I don't know if it depends if you're kind of at a point where you've ever thought about looking into buying houses or renting a house, which some of you as students won't be there yet. But there's this thing where basically they have these things called new build properties, which are brand new houses, and they come with a 5-year guarantee, and they cost, a lot of money, and people buy them. And then after 5 years, everything starts breaking down because they've only really made it built to last until their guarantee runs out, which is insane. Because, like I say, Victorian houses, they still are very solid houses now. The quality that people build houses with in the modern world is just so low compared to what it used to be. Basically the moral of this story, my personal moral to you, is try and live in an old house at least once in your life, because I don't know, they just have a nicer feeling. They're much cooler. So Atwood lived in both rural and suburban surroundings. She's Canadian. Her father is, he was an entomologist, so he's a scientist who looked at kind of beetles and bugs, and she had a lot of going into nature with him when she was a child. So she's got this kind of tension between city and country in quite a lot of her work, and she's kind of against urbanization. So she's against too much, just spreading cities, making cities bigger and making them really uniform. And she's also very interested in climate and environmental issues and those types of things. So she's quite a strong kind of socio-political advocate in many ways, Atwood. So a couple of attitudes then, that city planning is kind of careless a lot of the time. It causes problems. It includes, climate catastrophes that it's causing. So you can see sort of like this weather imagery coming through the poem. And it's just about kind of mass production, mass consumption, lack of care and thought and respect for nature, while humans just kind of plow forwards with their progress and their civilization. So Atwood's very much against that, and she's very environmental. Yeah, and there's a sense that it's kind of like lonely and lifeless to live in these types of places. It's not creative, it's not inspiring. There's no variety. I definitely found the suburbs where I lived as a kid so boring and regular, and it was miles if you wanted to walk to a shop to get a chocolate bar. So I used to go, it'd take me like half an hour to walk to a shop to get a chocolate bar and half an hour to walk back, and you just walk past all these houses that look exactly the same. And yeah, it was really boring. So I managed to escape the suburbs, which was nice. So yeah, there's some themes here for you to kind of play around with and do little mind maps on, and also some exercises and an essay question when you're ready to try that. So if you want more help, you can go to the Scribbly page as well. You can find all of the Cambridge poems there if you're doing Cambridge, or help with essay writing, that kind of thing. And yeah, hopefully you're feeling quite confident on this poem. And yeah, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.